here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
Fear. It can keep us alive. It can also put us in serious danger. Our brains react to the scary, the threatening, the unknown. Sometimes it heightens reality. Sometimes it blinds us to reality. Fear can remind us to keep our doors locked and keep the strangers out. Fear can also isolate us in a cloud of paranoia, even cause us to freak out about things that are not even there. Our brains have adapted so that quick decisions help us survive. But what happens when those shortcuts get things wrong? How do we approach the fact and fiction of fear? How do other people use that knowledge to manipulate our fear mechanisms? When is it good and not good to be afraid? Well, these questions and more are explored by sociologist Dr. Margie Kerr. She's a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and she hosts a lecture called The Science of Fear at the Great Courses Plus, a wonderful resource for science-based knowledge offered by experts in their fields and streaming right to you on your schedule via computer or on your phone with the Great Courses app, anytime, anywhere. Right now at the Great Courses Plus, you can watch The Science of Fear or any one of thousands of lectures on any topic you can think of with a fantastic offer, an all-access 1-month trial for free. My listeners get a full month of total access to the entire course library. So start your free month right now using my special URL. Don't wait any longer. Go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth. Remember, thegreatcoursesplus.com/Seth.
Why have you woken us from the deep? Why have you stirred us when we were asleep? We are the rage, we are the broken, sent to the grave with a malice unspoken. We were forgotten, cast into death, screaming revenge with every last breath. You called our names, you opened the door, you crossed our line. We are sleeping no more. Try as you might to escape us, you'll find there's no place to hide from the harrowing kind. Whispering nightmares, infecting your dreams, dragging you into psychotic extremes, touching your toes while you sleep in your bed, licking your nose with the tongues of the dead, looming above you and casting such woe, you'll ramble for days in a bleak afterglow, till one day we carry you into our night. You'll die, oh so slowly, dying of fright. We'll capture your scream on that pitiful note. We'll reach down and lodge it just under your throat. You'll wrestle and lurch, and you'll try to break loose from the hands on your throat like the rope of a noose. But there's no escape now. You summoned us here, so your every day be a lesson in fear. Wish you'd not conjured us up from the deep. Wish you'd not stirred us while we were asleep. Suffer you will, down to every cell, for you've found our sleeping ground. Welcome to hell.
Carmen Winstead was 17 years old, awkward and shy, not many friends, and a cloak of sadness all around her. She'd recently relocated from another city, and try as she might to fit in, she was just too different for many of the other students. Carmen was different, and the other girls at school never let her forget it, especially a gang of 5 that bullied her relentlessly. They called her the most terrible of names. One day, Carmen had forgotten her school books on a classroom desk, and when she came back to get them, she found that someone had written hateful words in Sharpie on every single page. She would retrieve her lunch bag to find that someone had poured something inside of it, glue or mud or worse. Her locker was constantly vandalized. She lived every day in fear and misery and loneliness. But finally, even the shy, diminutive Carmen decided that she had had enough, and she told the gang that she was going to stay behind after school to tell her teacher everything that had been happening. It was just before the end of the school day when a fire drill was announced, and the gang of 5 decided that this was a prime opportunity to stop Carmen in her tracks and humiliate her once again, this time in front of the entire school. The fire alarm rang, and the students funneled out into the schoolyard. At the end of the yard, near the fence, was a sewer drain. It had a round top that the girls had removed only minutes before, and it wasn't long before a gang of teasing girls pushed little Carmen toward it, taunting her, frightening her, ignoring her pleadings to just stop, please stop. And then the girls pushed her down into that hole, laughing and pointing and sneering and reveling in the humiliation that helpless Carmen would feel in such a vile and disgusting place. They pushed her in and looked down upon her with glee, already anticipating the terrified look on her face. But the moment they looked down into the sewer, they realized that something had gone terribly wrong. Carmen Winstead lay at the bottom, unmoving, except that her face was now smashed and bloody, her body inert and lifeless. The girls decided to tell their teachers it was all an accident. Carmen had merely wandered to that corner of the yard and somehow just fallen in. That was the story they told to the police when the investigation began. We don't know why she fell in. She just walked over there and suddenly disappeared, and it was just terrible. It's so terrible. The investigators believed their story, and upon the retrieval of Carmen Winstead's body, it was determined that she broke her neck on a concrete shelf at the bottom of the sewer. They called it a freak accident. Emergency workers said they'd never forget the contorted expression, the look of terror on that girl's broken face. Shortly afterward, the 5 girls began reporting variations on the same story. One would be taking a shower, and she would feel a finger touching her shoulder, but no one was there. Another would be brushing her teeth, and a hand would touch her on the back, but she was all alone. The girls would hear laughter from beyond the walls, even when no one else was nearby. Some said they were sitting on the toilet, and they felt a touch from inside the bowl, as if something was crawling up from the sewer itself. And on one chilly October morning, the girls met each other in the schoolyard, their faces white, their eyes filled with tears, their hands trembling. Each one of them had awoken that morning, gotten out of bed, started their routine with the usual hot shower, but each, in different neighborhoods and different houses, at different times, had emerged from the shower to see words written by a finger on the steamed bathroom mirror. For each girl, the words were exactly the same. I was pushed. In the days after, none of these girls found a restful night or enjoyed any kind of real peace. And one by one, each of the 5 would suddenly disappear at random times, their bodies eventually discovered inside the schoolyard sewer, with the cover left open, their necks broken, their faces smashed and contorted, their fate sealed. All 5 of these girls caused Carmen's death. All 5 covered it up. All 5 are now covered again by the casket and the dirt and the gravestone. And the authorities have still found no trace, no clue, no evidence for why any of them had died. Only the bodies discovered in the well. Only the aftermath. Does Carmen Winstead's spirit live on? Well, it is said that when you go into the bathroom and you get that creepy feeling, and we all know the feeling, you look around the corner, you check behind the shower curtain, you fear something slithering up out of the drain, you hear the sound of pipes rattling, you feel a sudden chill. You double-check everything because it feels like you are being watched. You are in a place of isolation. You are naked, vulnerable, and you feel another presence in the room. Some people say it is Carmen Winstead, discarded in the sewer so many years ago, humiliated and pushed to her death, now back from the grave, and determined for all eternity to keep pushing back. Oh yeah, that's just a rule of ghost stories. If you drop a little girl down into a well, get ready for bad things to happen. She will reemerge. She will drag your ass all the way down into the depths of Hades. It's Seth Andrews. It's Ghost Stories 2019. If you're new to the broadcast, this is an annual tradition. It's something I do because I love the Halloween holiday. And we just sit around the virtual campfire and tell ghost stories, and I'll cap the broadcast with about a 35-minute original and highly produced ghost story just for you. If you like that kind of thing, support my Ghost Stories audiobook. It released last year. It's nearly 4 hours of, again, highly produced content, really good stuff, voice actors, sound effects, the works. You can find it. Just search for Seth Andrews Ghost Stories on audible.com or at iTunes. And thanks so much for the support. It's a great book, or at least I hope it is. I think it is. And if you love Halloween, it'll be a great addition to the holiday. So thanks so much for the support. I had such great plans for my Halloween display this year. Being an 80s child and a fan of Michael, Freddie, and Jason, you know, from the classic films, I thought, wouldn't it be funny to do a campfire scene in your front yard? And sitting around the campfire are Michael, Freddie, and Jason, and they've got sticks with these fake marshmallows made of styrofoam. And then the fire is really ingenious. I learned how to do it on YouTube. But you just take orange lights, flickering, flashing holiday lights, and you spray this insulating foam on top, and you throw twigs on top, and you dust it with black and red spray paint. And then you just plug it in at night, and it looks like flickering coals, embers. It looks like a campfire at night. It's really ingenious. And so, you know, these characters aren't scary anymore. Back when they first came out, they frightened a generation. But these days, Michael, Freddie, and Jason are like the guys you bump into at a reunion. They've become so familiar. They're so ubiquitous. We see them on memes and gags, and there's so many costumes and parodies that they're not really scary anymore. Even the 40-year Halloween remake, or not remake, but the sequel with Jamie Lee Curtis, it wasn't a bad film, but Michael's not scary in that way. Not really. And so I thought, well, you know, it'll just be fun and funny. And I learned how to build them from scratch. Again, on YouTube, you take a PVC pipe and you make a skeleton, like a 6-foot skeleton, life-size skeleton. And then inside we filled it with chicken wire for the chest to kind of fill out the chest and body area. You take pop bottles for the arms underneath, and you put clothing over the top of it with shoes. And, of course, the masks go on top. And so as they were starting to come together, Natalie looked at me and she goes, "These look scary." And I'm like, oh, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. She said, but I mean, there are young children in the neighborhood. These look scary. You're going to scare the neighbor kids. Oh, they're going to be fine. These three icons, everybody knows them. They're not going to be scary. It's fine. But I did have to admit that at about 6 feet tall, especially the Jason, was really imposing looking. And so it was October 1st, and I have the rest of the scene built. I've got tombstones out there, and I've got kind of a laser floor that hits the grass, and if the fog machine hits it just right, it looks like a swamp. And then I've got these 3 elevated chairs, and I put my 3 icons in front of the campfire, and as soon as I sat them down and lit them, I realized, holy shit, they're terrifying. There is something about the way they came out. There's something about the way that they look when they are lit. They are genuinely scary, especially to a young child. And Natalie just looked at me. She's like, you're going to scare the neighbors. You're going to scare the neighbor children. Well, as if on cue, 2 things happened. Neighbor across the street brought out his little girl to the front porch. I think she was curious. She likes to see my fog machine every year. But they didn't even step off the porch to come over. And then I saw another couple walking up the street, and I actually heard, I'm not making this up, I heard the guy say, oh, yeah, that's going to scare him. And they must have been talking about their child. And I realized that I was probably going to end up on the neighborhood Facebook page with people complaining about the house that nobody wants to go near because their 4-year-olds are having nightmares at night. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there and looked at my handiwork, Natalie's handiwork. We just looked at each other, and I'm like, I can't do it. I cannot do it. I do not want to scare young children. It's supposed to be fun. And so as soon as I put them out, I went over and I grabbed each effigy and I chucked it in the garage. And I replaced them with skeletons, which are innocuous and funny. And one of them's waving to the street, and they're not scary at all. And it turned out to be a really good move. But after all of that time, all of that effort, all the gluing of the PVC pipe and the elbows and measuring everything out and I went to Goodwill to get the clothes and, or not Goodwill, but Salvation Army to get some clothes that look like the clothes they would wear. I bought the Michael Myers coveralls and I had the masks ready. After all of that, they're just lying. Whenever I pull into the garage in my car, looking at me are Michael, Freddy, and Jason. And they have not left the garage. And so I have no idea what to do with them. Like they're, pieced together with spit and tinfoil. The pop bottles and chicken wire and Gorilla tape. It's not like I can put them on eBay and sell them. But anyway, that's kind of where I ended up. So I have a Halloween display. There are photographs on Facebook, but we had to call an audible because, quite frankly, I did not want to be responsible for psychologically damaging the 4-year-olds in this neighborhood, and there are a great many of them. But I am delighted to be participating in the Halloween holiday season. I am so jacked, so ready, so excited about October 31st to see all the kids come over in their costumes. We're going to have candy ready, and we're going to watch scary movies, and it's going to be an amazing time. And this broadcast is part of the celebration of the season for me and a great many people. So I hope you feel the same, and I thank you so much for listening. It's one of the best-known ghost stories of the American South, stemming back to the end of the 19th century. Abbeville, Alabama. If you're in this area, you probably don't want to get caught walking around after dark when you should be home in bed. Or else you might just run into Huggin' Molly. Anyone and everyone who grew up in the Deep South probably has already heard about Huggin' Molly and how she got her name. Mom used to say, don't be out after dark. Huggin' Molly will get you. It is said that Huggin' Molly is a witch. She's not the kind of witch that would snatch you up and sacrifice you or cook you up in the oven. I guess she's more of a good witch, in a way, although her description doesn't sound like any good witch I've ever heard of. She is a phantom, 7 feet tall and as big around as a bale of cotton. She only appears at night, walking the streets of Abbeville, sweeping her black skirt along the ground as she walks. Now, if she sees you outside, far from home, well after dark, it is said that she will suddenly chase you down, wrap her arms around you, put her mouth to your ear, and scream like the tormented in hell. To the residents of Abbeville, Huggin' Molly is as real as the trees that rustle in the wind at night. The town's welcome sign actually has the words, "The home of Huggin' Molly," with an image of a large woman chasing a child on the sign. There's a restaurant named after this ghost. A kind of helper, I suppose. Huggin' Molly, helping the wary mothers who want their children home and safe when the sun goes down. So for over 100 years, they've told their children, oh yeah, go out, play, do your chores, go wherever you may go, but make sure you're home before dark, or Huggin' Molly will get you, and she may give you a hug and a scream that might make you never want to go outside again. Here's one more from the haunted South. The legendary ghost of Francisville, Louisiana, has a story to it that sounds a bit like a Spanish telenovela. It's so complicated. On the Myrtles plantation in Francisville, the owner's name was Clark Woodruff. He was a man of great wealth and many servants. Now, according to legend, Woodruff began a torrid affair with one of his servants, an attractive young woman named Chloe. But eventually he grew tired of Chloe, and she knew it. Chloe became jealous and very worried that she would be sent away, out of the house, back into the fields for back-breaking labor. And so she started to eavesdrop on Clark Woodruff and his wife and 2 children. Everywhere she could, in every room in which they were talking, Chloe would lurk in the doorways, the corners, the shadows, even on the other sides of walls with a teacup to her ear, so she could hear if someone was talking about her, preparing to discard her and send her away. Clark Woodruff discovered this eavesdropping, and he became enraged, so enraged that he took a kitchen knife and he sliced off her eavesdropping ear. In the days after that, to hide the wound and the scar, Chloe would wear a green scarf around her head. In the weeks after she was so cruelly injured, Chloe concocted a plan. Now, it's not known if she wanted revenge against the Woodruffs or if she simply wanted Clark Woodruff to herself. But she poisoned a birthday cake that was eaten by the wife and children, and the 3 of them slowly died. Once again, it was only Mr. Woodruff and Chloe there to receive him. But the other servants had watched this story unfold, and they knew about the poison. They decided they would not let this heinous murder of an innocent woman and her children stand. And so one day, when the house and property were empty, they grabbed the evil Chloe and they dragged her to a nearby tree, tied a rope around her neck, and lynched her on the spot. Clark Woodruff's affections were unknown at this time, but he certainly was shocked to find his former love swinging from the large tree behind the servants' quarters. A punishment for crimes he did not yet know were committed, and revenge for the death of the innocent. There's a mysterious photograph that was taken on the Myrtles plantation in 1992. It's a photograph of the house, but even though the place was not occupied at the moment the photo was taken, the image clearly shows a young, attractive woman lurking in a shady corner of the home with a green scarf around her head. Perhaps Chloe's still there, eavesdropping upon all who enter, desperately hoping that she'll get to stay right there in the house and not be sent away to a destination unknown. I've got Greg on the switchboard. Greg, you're on the Thinking Atheist Ghost Stories podcast. How are you?
I'm good.
You've had a ghostly encounter of some kind? What are we talking about?
I've had an encounter of something I can't explain. That's about the best I can say about it.
Okay. Well, describe the encounter. What happened?
Well, I was watching TV, and this was back in the late 90s, 98, 99, something like that. And so I got to explain the setup here. It's I've got a CRT TV, and then right to the left of it is VCR, and then right to the left of that is one of these touch to turn on lamps. So what happened was, the VCR was off but plugged in, the lamp was off but plugged in, and the TV just starts going wavy, and it was uniform. The lines were evenly spaced, and I figured, okay, that's just something weird with the network, or I don't know what. But then the VCR ejects its cassette, and the touch lamp turns on 2 clicks, which honestly, it didn't make any sense. I was just like, is an electrical pass through here or what? And honestly, I didn't think much of it at all. I just went back to watch it, turned off the lamp, went back to make sure that there wasn't anything wrong with the stuff plugged in. And I just went back to my stuff, and I told the story, it wasn't until months later I was telling the story to a friend, and they asked me if the door to my room was directly across from another door in the house. And it was. And when I told them that, they told me that creates a gateway to the spirit realm. And kind of looked at it at that, and I was like, huh.
I'm thinking in my own house, if I have any doors that are exactly opposite of each other, that I've inadvertently opened a portal somewhere.
Exactly opposite, right.
Okay.
And honestly, I haven't heard anything about that at all anywhere. I don't know where they got that information.
I think out of the ass is probably a good possibility. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm stuck on the VCR. Like, we've all had a power bump and the lights do something funky. But when the VHS player ejects the video cassette, just ejects it right there in the middle of whatever you're watching, that to me is kind of freaky.
Right. And what got me was the whole thing was sequential. It's like something was moving across because it was from the direction of the door to the direction of the window. So in your mind, I mean, looking at it as a rationalist, I'm guessing you're a rationalist. Do you think it's potentially spirit activity? You know, the ghost of maybe Betamax going after VHS? You know, I mean, I don't know. Right. What's your take on all of it in retrospect? It was the death of VCRs. How do you feel about it now? Soul just moved out the window. I'm a physicist, so my thinking was always there had to be some kind of like energy flux in the power or something like that, but that didn't really make sense either because an electrical current moves kind of all simultaneously. Yeah. So it doesn't go sequentially like that. But you haven't necessarily bought into a supernatural explanation. You're thinking there's an explanation rooted in the real world. As a physicist, is that your take? Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. But I also heard some interesting theories about various, like, things called, the most interesting thing I heard was things called quantum states of life. It wasn't a paper. It was something some guy at work had shown me on the internet, but it was interesting. The theory was that if ghosts do exist or something like that could exist, then it's related to kind of the best way to explain it was, you know, when you have somebody following you too closely at night and their lights are in your eyes and you're driving and you switch your mirror up to the dimmer, it's like that. It's possibly an echo of something in the real world that is dampened. But honestly, that, again, there's no evidence corroboration of that either. All right. So the theory is that something has happened in the real world and it passes through some kind of a filter in which other people then see it or experience it. That's the theory that this person was positing. That's right. That's the gist of what I heard. Okay. I thought it was interesting, but I don't have any there's no proof of this.
Yeah, well, I think that's the premise of the entire show. They're great stories, but there's not necessarily any proof. But I still love the stories, So, Greg, thanks for sharing that with us. I mean, honestly, if I was sitting there and all of a sudden there was a pattern on the television and the VCR ejected the tape and then the lights came on, I'd be looking around once or twice myself. And, it sounds like a great scene for a ghost story. So.
Yeah, it's the only thing I've ever had in my life that's happened that I have had absolutely no explanation for.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing it, and thanks for being a part of the Ghost Stories broadcast this year. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks.
It's the traditional end of summer on Lake Lanier. So far this year on that lake, 11 people have drowned or died in boating accidents, with hundreds of lives lost since the lake was formed in the 50s.
Sadly, there have already been 2 drownings here.
There are dangers in the water that we should be really concerned about.
Their loved one drowned after a day out on the lake.
The 160 islands that lay upon Lake Lanier are actually hilltops of once family-owned farms.
There's a supposed curse here where if you swim in the water, you boat in the water, anything like that, there's been disappearances, drownings, and weird boating accidents that can't really be explained.
In the 1950s in North Georgia, the Army Corps of Engineers flooded the foothills of the North Georgia mountains to create Lake Lanier, named after the famous American poet Sidney Lanier. The lake buried beneath its surface so many places, so many legacies. 59 square miles of farmland, businesses, homes, memories. The federal government relocated more than 250 families so that Georgia could have this lake. Also moved were 20 cemeteries and the bodies buried within them. Lake Lanier seems unable to escape the turbulence that it once caused to so many who call this place home. The lake has seen an alarming number of freak accidents and mysterious drownings, so many that some locals have said that the lake itself is cursed. They say don't put a line in the water, don't swim beyond the piers, don't take the canoe, the kayak, the fishing boat, especially to a place where you can't be seen by other people. There's just something about this lake. There have been a few drowning survivors who narrowly escaped, only to tell a terrifyingly similar story. They said that they had been good swimmers in calm waters, and suddenly they sank below the surface, each of them feeling hands clutched around their ankles, dragging them down. They had bruises on their ankles, strangely shaped in the outlines of thumbs and fingers, bruises that could not be explained by the doctors who examined them. Were there graveyard bodies that were missed way back in 1956? The dead given no new place to rest, but buried again under 38,000 acres of water. The corpses emerging from the mud and the rocks and the current, with cold, bony fingers reaching upward toward the surface, waiting for the casual swimmer or the rubber raft or the boat propeller to add yet another name to the underwater cemeteries that should have found new places of rest, but which now sit waiting for the next unsuspecting swimmer to pass by. Here's a ghost story that was emailed to me by a listener. His name is also Seth, and it's nice to see some representation out there, my friend. It's funny, when I was growing up, Seth was not a common name, but I'm meeting more and more of them in the last decade or so. It's kind of cool. Anyway, Seth says this. He said, I was in the basement doing laundry while my son, 4 years old, was playing down there too. He starts talking to himself, which I pay no attention to because kids do that. After a few minutes, he comes running into me and he asks if he can go play with the lady behind the furnace to her cave to go camping. WTF, keep in mind I do not believe in the supernatural one bit, but that got my hair standing on end. Looking as confident as possible, I strut to the other end of our unfinished, basically dungeon basement, and peek around the furnace to find nothing there. My son yells, "Okay, bye," from the other room, and when I asked who he was talking to, he said, "Lori went to her cave." The original owners of the home were named John and Lori Benz. The second occurrence was even more terrifying because it happened in the dead of night. I actually like scary dreams. I like waking from them and realizing they're not real and going back to sleep. I woke from some scary dream that I don't remember vivid details of. The only thing I could recall was this weird silhouette of a monster stalking me. I went to the bathroom and then down to the main floor to fill my water bottle I keep on my nightstand. On my way down the steps, I heard someone walking around because the wood floors were creaking. I assumed one of my children was out of bed watching TV and heard me coming, so I announced, "Don't let me catch you out of bed or you'll get thumped." I'm a fair dad, so I didn't look for them. I let them hide until they thought it was safe to escape back to their room. Our sink has a window above it to look out into the yard. While I was filling my bottle, I heard more footsteps at a walking pace coming toward me. They stopped just outside the kitchen door where I couldn't see around the corner. I heard the word thump in an unfamiliar voice and turned around. Right when I turned, there was a light knock on the window behind me. Tap, tap, tap. Basically sweating, I turned around slowly and saw near the street, by one of our trees, the silhouette that I had dreamed about not 5 minutes prior. It was just standing there, looking at me. I could not move. I was so scared, but intrigued at the same time. When I finally blinked, it was gone. Took me 20 minutes to talk myself into going back upstairs to bed, turned on every light while I trekked through the house, and kept the hallway light on because, monsters can't get you in the light. Seth, thanks so much for the submission. Great stories, my friend. A few years ago, we did a segment on these 2-sentence ghost stories. There's actually some really good ones out there and more every single year. For example, I can't move, breathe, speak, or hear, and it's so dark all the time. If I knew it would be this lonely, I would have been cremated instead. I woke up to hear knocking on glass. At first I thought it was the window, until I heard it come from the mirror again. She wondered why she was casting 2 shadows. After all, there was only a single light bulb. They delivered the mannequins in bubble wrap. From the main room, I began to hear popping. In all of the time that I've lived alone in this house, I swear to God, I've closed more doors than I've opened. My daughter won't stop crying and screaming in the middle of the night. I visit her grave and ask her to stop, but it doesn't help. My wife woke me up last night to tell me there was an intruder in our house. She was murdered by an intruder 2 years ago. I never go to sleep, but I keep waking up. The longer I wore it, the more it grew on me. She had such pretty skin. The wailing from the baby monitor just won't stop. The problem is my daughter is with her mother this weekend, over 200 miles away. The knife, it slices just like butter. I tried to be a loving mother. And finally, the last thing I saw was my alarm clock flashing 12:07 before she pushed her long, rotting nails through my chest, her other hand muffling my screams. I sat bolt upright, relieved it was only a dream. But as I saw my alarm clock read 12:06, I heard my closet door creak open. Neil Gaiman, the author and storyteller, hosted a special event back in 2014. It was wasn't a TED Talk, but it was a TED event. It was a late night, sort of a half-secret ghost story session where he read a ghost story for the audience. And then he followed it up with an essay called Ghost in the Machine, which contemplates the psychology of why scary stories speak to us so powerfully. And the essay read like this. It said, "Why tell ghost stories? Why read them or listen to them? Why take such pleasure in tales that have no purpose but comfortably to scare? I don't know, not really. It goes way back. We have ghost stories from ancient Egypt, after all, ghost stories in the Bible, classical ghost stories from Rome, along with werewolves, cases of demonic possession, and of course, over and over, witches. We have been telling each other tales of otherness, of life beyond the grave for a long time. Stories that prickle the flesh and make the shadows deeper. And most important, remind us that we live and that there is something special, something unique and remarkable about the state of being alive. Fear is a wonderful thing in small doses. You ride the ghost train into the darkness, knowing that eventually the doors will open and you will step out into the daylight once again. It's always reassuring to know that you're still here, still safe, that nothing strange has happened, not really. It's good to be a child again for a little while and to fear. Not governments, not regulations, not infidelities or accountants or distant wars, but ghosts and such things that don't exist, and even if they do, can do nothing to hurt us. And this time of year is best for a haunting, as even the most prosaic things cast the most disquieting shadows. The things that haunt us can be tiny things, a web page, a voicemail message, an article in a newspaper, perhaps by an English writer remembering Halloween's long gone and skeletal trees and winding lanes and darkness. An article containing fragments of ghost stories in which, nonsensical although the idea has to be, nobody ever remembers reading but you, and which simply isn't there the next time you go and look for it. Neil Gaiman, Ghost in the Machine. I've got Dan on the switchboard. Dan, thanks so much for being a part of the conversation today. We're talking ghost stories. I see in my notes here that you're a D&D player.
That's true.
Did you grow up being warned about the devil and demons and hell and all that stuff?
Oh, yeah. I was definitely a part of the satanic panic. My parents are very religious, and were really, really concerned. They actually offered to buy all my D&D books so that they could burn them.
Oh, my God. Well, you got to...
But I told them I'd just use the money to buy new books, the next edition, so then we didn't do that. So
got to eradicate the evil, so to speak. Well, tell me about your ghostly encounter or your scary encounter or whatever it was. What happened to you?
Yeah, so I've been a skeptic for a long time, and I don't believe in the supernatural or anything like that, but it is a story that I can't explain and still gives me the heebie-jeebies when I think about it today. So this is like 20 years ago, back in 1999, and I'm a woodworker by trade, and the company I was working for was getting a little light on work, and so they didn't want to let me go. So what they did was they farmed my labor out to another company that they rented out and maintained modular furniture systems for companies. So like in high-rise buildings, a lot of times if they have a company has a floor, all the cubicles and desks and all that sort of thing are rented out, and then, a company like this maintains them. So it was just like a typical workday morning, and we were in this building. And it's a 26-floor building, and we were taking out cubicles and then running them up to the top floor for storage. And I should digress here a second. If you don't know anything about high-rise buildings, there's always a floor, at least one, that's called the maintenance or mechanical floor. And this is where they keep the HVAC, the communication systems, sprinkler systems, the top of the elevator shaft, things like that. Because if you've been through buildings like that, you never see any of that stuff And that's because it's at the top. That's where they do all their storage. So we're taking this stuff up there, and to access the mechanical floor, what you have to do is you have to either have a freight elevator or you have to use the normal elevator and have a special key that'll let you get up there. I'm sure if you've been in an elevator, you'll see there's a place for a key that allows you to get to restricted areas. I'm there with one of my friends, and we're going up for like the third or fourth time. I can't remember exactly. And we're just kind of chatting. We've got some stuff that we're going to offload. And we're watching the lights as we go up like you do. And it's like 23rd floor, 24th floor, 25th. And it gets to the 26th, and it just keeps going up. And we just suddenly went silent and just looked at each other, because that's the top of the building, you know. So it keeps going up, and it goes up for what feels like about 2 floors. And we're just dead quiet because we don't know what the heck's going on, right? The doors open, and we look out, and in front of us is what appears to be like a long hallway that goes left and right directly out of this. And it's the weirdest thing because it's all lit with nothing but trouble lights. You know, those red lights that hang on the walls like an emergency?
Yeah.
It's lit by trouble lights, red ones, every like 20 to 30 feet. And it's carpeted. The walls are cement. And it's just dead silent except for this. I kind of remember this kind of vague hum, like if you've ever been in a place with a lot of electricity. And that's all there is. And we're just staring at this, and neither of us are willing to step out, right? It's like, I don't have any idea what's going on, and I'm basically scared to death. And I asked my friend, I'm like, are you going to go out there? And he's like, hell no.
So you guys are just in the elevator, like, and you're craning your necks out to peer down these hallways left and right.
Exactly. Yeah, and it just seems to go on for like forever. There's no doors or anything like that are within sight. Just this long, long hallway, both directions, with these trouble lights that are lighting it. So I'm like, yeah, no, definitely not. So we both kind of step back a little bit more into the elevator, and I can't remember which one of us, but one of us presses the door close button. Door closes, and the elevator immediately starts to go down. And it goes down about 2 flights, and the doors open, and lo and behold, there's the top floor. I don't even know what to say. It was, you know, we're like, okay, I don't know what's going on. So we unload the stuff, and we get down to the floor that we're working on, like 14th or 15th floor. And we get off there, and we go find the maintenance supervisor, the guy who gave us the key and who's, you know, in charge of the building. And we're like, hey, so what's above the 26th floor there? What's going on up there? And he looks at us and says, there's nothing above there. There's no other floors. The 26th is the top. He's like, there's a access hatch you can crawl out to get under the roof, but there's nothing else up there. And we were just kind of nodded, looked at each other, and then went about our day because neither of us had any idea what to do with that knowledge.
Yeah. Well, this is
what do you do?
This crazy
when
shit
you've been in a place that doesn't exist
is the kind of thing that happens when you play Dungeons and Dragons. You've opened the portal to the spirit world, and now you're accessing floors that do not exist. So
I've always wondered, like, what would have happened if I stepped out? And I'm like, would I have been one of those people that just like disappeared? It's like, I don't know, this Dan Hansen guy, you know, he went off to work one day and just never came back or what? I don't know. I tried to bring it up with that guy like a week later, and he's like, I don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, all right.
As if he knows something.
I looked up the building.
You don't, yeah.
I looked up the building to see. It's like, 26 floors, you know, and that's it. I'm like, all right, I don't know. And this is like, I've told this story like twice to people. But I've never shared it because it's like, I keep thinking everybody thinks I'm crazy. Everybody's just going to think I'm nuts. I'm like, I don't know. I can't explain it.
I'm interested in people who might be listening who might be religious or spiritual, and they hear a story like this. And when someone like you says, I don't know, they're like, holy shit, he had an encounter with the spirit world and he's not prepared to admit it. You know, that's where I would go if I was a believer. But, you know, you're at the point where you're like, I don't know what the hell happened, but here's my story. And that's kind of where you're at, right?
Yeah, I've never been able to move past that. I've never been able to say, you know, okay, well, this means that I have some sort of proof, because it's not proof. But I certainly don't have an explanation either. And I guess I've just let it lie because I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, well, it's a great story, and it's a great addition to the show. Dan, thanks for sharing it with us, and I hope you and yours have a happy Halloween, okay?
Thanks so much. Love the show.
Okay, let me take a real short break. When I come back, I have written for you and produced for you a brand new and completely original ghost story. It runs about 35 minutes, so you want to block about a half hour, just a little more out of your schedule. If you can't do so, hit pause until you can, so you don't have to listen to it in fragments. I will play it for you on the other side of this, so don't go anywhere. I don't know how many years ago it was that I had decided I was going to try to finish the Ghost Stories broadcast with an original produced story. And I was nervous about it, and so I released it. And the response was just so overwhelmingly positive that I started to do it every single year. We've had some interesting stories. We've had, the handprint on the window, and we had Lydia, the nurse, working in the hospital on the 7th floor in room 706. We talked about clowns, and we've had the guys who were messing with the Ouija board. That's not going to go well. Last year, it was the dead under the bed. It's an interesting challenge for me as a storyteller and producer every single year. I can't guarantee that I'm able to do this every October. But this year, yes, I have gone back to my lair, and I have concocted a witch's brew, my friends. The story contains no actual witches. That's just a figure of speech. But I certainly hope you enjoy it. Again, it runs about 35 minutes, so lower the lights, crank up the volume, get yourself in a place where you can really get into it. And thanks so much for listening. It's my way of wishing you and yours a happy Halloween. Christie drove her red Honda Civic across town and pulled up at the Kellerman home in a blistering rain. She hated driving in the weather, but there were a few hours of gray light left on this stormy November Saturday. Babysitting. It wasn't a glamour gig, but the Kellermans seemed like nice people on the phone. And she had to admit the money was pretty good, $100 to watch a 10-year-old until midnight, while Tom and Lindsay Kellerman attended some kind of a fundraiser across town. $100 to sit on the couch, make a few snacks, and watch little Billy play video games while she talked to her boyfriend on the phone beats fast food and minimum wage for sure. She parked on the left edge of the driveway, threw the umbrella over her head, and scampered up onto the porch to ring the doorbell. Christie, thank you so much for doing this. Please come in and dry off. Lindsay Kellerman was a bright-eyed, animated woman in her mid-30s, dressed so properly that she seemed to have been time-warped in from a 1950s television show. Tom was walking down the staircase in a suit and tie, slightly older, hair parted on the side and slicked back like a TV preacher. He smiled and let Lindsay do all the talking. Billy's a good kid. He won't be any trouble. There's leftover chicken in the fridge if he gets hungry, and there's ice cream in the freezer, but don't let him go crazy, okay? Christie nodded, taking mental notes. The house is all yours. Make yourself at home. You've got my number saved in your phone, right? Saved right here, Christie replied. We're going to be late, but we'll be back as soon as this thing is over. Should be around midnight. Call or text me if you need anything, okay? Lindsay's face was a constant, reassuring smile, like a warm hug. But there was something else, something behind those eyes. Christie couldn't tell what it was. The Kellermans gathered the rest of themselves and stepped through the door leading into the garage. Just one car sharing 2 spaces. An odd choice for these two, Christie thought. It was An old, worn-out, gunmetal gray station wagon that probably came off the line back in the early 1970s. Tiny white wall tires and little outlines of rust around the edges, announcing that the car and its indoor parking spot had only recently been introduced. The garage door opened. The couple got into the station wagon. The key turned in the ignition, and Christie started to close the door to the house when Lindsay Kellerman shouted something from the passenger side window. She shouted, "Oh, and don't forget to rock the baby." And with that last syllable, and before Christie could really process the sentence, the car door closed, the vehicle was well out of the garage and on its way. Don't forget to rock the baby. What baby? There was only Billy. 10-year-old Billy, right? Christie grabbed her phone and started to text Lindsay Kellerman's number, asking about this baby. But at that moment, she was interrupted. Billy had walked into the kitchen, stuck his head halfway in the fridge, and Christie was hungry enough to join right in. Their growling tummies a prime opportunity for an introduction and some small talk. She placed her cell phone on the countertop. When she turned around to say something to Billy, he was already back in the living room in front of the TV. He wasn't a talkative kid. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But she queried him from the other room. "Hey, Billy, you don't have any brothers or sisters, right? It's just you, right?" Billy's head turned counterclockwise on his little shoulders in an almost alarming creep, his eyes not blinking. Christie looked around the kitchen, curious that the two windows in this room looked like they'd been forced closed, jammed into place, unable to open. "Billy, it's just you, right?" "Yes, it's just me." "Okay," Christie sighed. "Just making sure. I thought I heard your mom say something. It was weird." And Billy interrupted, "But don't forget to rock the baby." And then Billy's head turned back to face the television as Christie felt the prickly cold pins of disoriented anxiety nip at the back of her neck. And then suddenly from upstairs, Christie just about jumped through the ceiling. And she stood there, at the end of the kitchen bar, the silhouette of Billy's head still black against the brightness of the TV, the muffled cry from upstairs piercing through her. "Billy!" She turned and looked up at the ceiling, looked down at her cell phone on the countertop again, back to the ceiling, and then yelled out, "Billy, you hear that?" "What is that? I thought you didn't have any brothers or sisters." "Billy?" But Billy wasn't there. The only thing moving beyond the images on the television was Christie herself, as she discovered herself already at the bottom of the staircase, looking up, listening, compelled to find a crying child somewhere above. Her steps upward were slow but deliberate, her senses on high alert, the hallway and doors slowly revealing themselves as Christie met the second floor. Still moving, forward, two open doors on the right, none on the left, a closed third door at the end of the hallway. She crept forward still, her eyes keenly perceiving every window along her path, every window somehow sealed shut, with screws or nails or tiny boards that covered the latches. She peered through the first open doorway. An office with a desk and a chair, scattered papers, boxes, and machines. Forward further, 5 steps, she peered in through the second doorway. The room was empty. Nothing but light and shadows. She continued down the hall, 6 steps. She leaned toward the closed door. She placed her hand upon the cold brass doorknob and was about to turn it when... The sound was behind her. Not behind the closed door, behind her. Before she realized she had done it, she burst backward and into the empty second bedroom, the baby's cries filling her frantic ears. She opened the closet. Nothing. She checked the window, again sealed shut. She twirled to look at each of the four walls. Nothing but light and shadow. Light and shadow. And then she noticed it. The shadow on the north-facing wall. A kind of cut-off rectangle with tiny pickets. The shadow, the shape, it seemed to flutter slightly for a second. And then... Christie fell backward with surprise and shock and confusion and terror. She was pressed backward against the far wall, not leaving, not pursuing, but locked, her eyes frozen upon the picket shadows, her ears still hearing the infant cry that her mind refused to accept. She lost all concept of time. She was frightened, but she did not flee. Who knows how many minutes passed by before Christie finally drew herself up, got control of her breathing, and inched toward the corner of the room, right hand outstretched, like someone feeling their way through the dark. The sound of the baby filled the room, filled her skull, a simultaneously compelling and frighteningly familiar sound that betrayed no origin. She inched forward, her hands out, slightly passing back and forth in the air. Forward even further, until Christie reached the wall with the shadows, and as her second finger grazed the shadow pattern before her, the cut-off rectangle with the tiny pickets, the shadow moved. Left, then right, then left, then right. And the room suddenly became as silent as an empty church, except for the sound of old, creaking mahogany wood, and some tiny springs beneath them. Left, right, left, right. Don't forget to rock the baby. She's not my sister. Christie screamed in surprise as she spun around to see little Billy in the doorway to the room, the boy's voice eerily calm and steady. She was here when I got here. She cries sometimes. Christie became self-consciously aware that she was still gesturing like a metronome with a shadow on the wall. And she abruptly stopped, realizing the absurdity, the insanity of what was happening. Now there was no baby cry, only the timpani of her own pounding heart. The cloudy, rain-filtered light of dusk filtering through the window, the boy in the doorway, the shadow of a child's cradle upon the wall, cast there from empty space inside an empty room. Christie felt like she was going to lose the power to stand, but she didn't want to fall, not here. A blur of scrambling seconds later, she was sprawled at the top of the staircase, resting back against the rail, one eye on the open second doorway, both ears constantly scanning for the phantom wailings of a newborn child. We have to rock her so she won't cry. If she cries, she'll wake up Mr. Janti. Mr. Janti, Christie replied. You don't want to wake up Mr. Janti. Billy stared at her. He was wiser than his years, but eerily matter-of-fact, as he spoke about things that should not be, that could not be, all around him. He kept his explanation simple, because that's how he understood it. Mr. Janti doesn't like people. Mr. Janti hurts people. Who is Mr. Janti? I stay in my room when he comes out, and I lock the door. Mr. Janti always checks the doorknobs. who is Mr. Janti? He came here after. Christie realized that she was holding her breath. She asked that same question a third time. Billy, who is Mr. Janti? Christie did not need to be told to believe in ghosts. She'd long felt that the physical world could be touched by spirits. She'd heard ghost stories, and she believed many of them. And this was the story in which she somehow played the starring role. There were things here, both alive and dead, able to make rules and break them, and somehow both here and not here. She stepped a little further away from Billy. Who was this boy? Who were these people? Were they all phantoms? Was anything or anyone real? The hallway spun into a blur, and Christie felt herself stagger. And then, again, suddenly, and behind the sound of a baby's cry, "Come on, quick!" Billy sounded excited for the first time. He grabbed Christie's hand and ran back into the room of light and shadows. He closed the door and locked it. The crying infant sounded like it was right next to her. But again, only the air, only the shadow of a baby's crib against the wall. "He's awake." Billy continued to speak in a kind of monotone, but his eyes had changed. They were sharper, wider, like that of prey on high alert for a predator. His hands wrapped around the doorknob as he pushed the rest of himself toward the hinges. "Rock the baby." The only connection between instruction and action that Christie could find was that rib cage of tiny railed posts unnaturally cast upon the wall. From her sitting position on the floor, knees pulled into her chest, hands trembling, Christie reached up and pushed inward against the dark outline until it moved. Back, forth, responding to her touch that wasn't a touch, quieting the infant voice. Back, forth. Billy looked over to Christie, placing his finger upon his lips, giving the universal sign for quiet. Quiet. Don't say anything. So quietly, Christie just continued manipulating the shadow. Back, forth. Rock the baby. They both stared at the tarnished old doorknob, locked from within. The only thing separating them from whatever it was that staggered and clamored within the house beyond. You didn't want to wake Mr. Janti. Mr. Janti always checks the doorknobs. And they could hear the heavy footsteps walking away. Karina died here. What? Karina, that's her name. She was here when I got here. Karina. Yeah. She cries sometimes. I don't know why. Maybe because she died. Maybe because she's all alone. Karina cries. Yeah, sometimes. And she wakes up Mr. Janti. Yeah, sometimes. Christie suddenly focused on her surroundings. This closed shell of a house. Billy, who is Mr. Janti? Christie held her right hand over her mouth to muffle the scream. She hadn't even realized it until she did, that her left hand was back against the shadow of the crib, pulsing it like a sprinter's heartbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then purposefully slowing, willing herself down, slowing down, slow down, rock the baby, gently rocking, go to sleep, rock-a-bye baby, in the treetop, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. Oh God, what a stupid song. Just rock the baby, rock the baby, rock the baby. The doorway was consumed with this thing, so tall that it was forced to lower its head to see below the doorframe, so broad that it had to turn sideways to slide into the room. It was a mountain of angry flesh, the veins lining its limbs as if drawn there with a painter's brush. The hands were enormous, with unnaturally long fingers below the knuckles, pointing at the ground like spears. The pores of its skin seemed to gape and yaw like little mouths. The lower jaw hung low under the weight of massive teeth. The eyes seemed to pull backward into the face in a kind of sinister squint, the pupils glowing bright red and filled with violence. Christie and Billy became like statues. No movement, no sound, except for Christie's index finger still gently rocking the ghostly child. Rocking. Mr. Janti. He was pure malevolence, no question. He was an unholy thing, no question. He was not of this world. He scanned the room with eyes like the blood moon, breathing, scanning, in, out, back, forth, close enough to touch. Mr. Janti looked right where Christie was sitting pressed against the wall. She had never in her life been so scared, not even close. She held her breath. She choked back her fear. And she held quiet as the baby became quiet, rocking the baby. Mr. Janti looked down, then around, and then straight ahead. He had looked right through them. As the breath was about to scream out of her lungs, Christie then watched this dark, deadly giant retreat back through the doorway, turn and walk down to the end of the hallway, to the room from which he first emerged. If Billy hadn't moved first, Christie might have been frozen in that spot until morning. But move he did, and he seemed to release the oxygen in the whole room when he gently closed the door upon its now bent latch and sat backward against it. Scary, huh? Billy, what is that thing? What's happening? I'm not supposed to be here. They make me stay here. What? What do you mean? Mr. and Mrs. Kellerman. You mean your mom and dad? Oh, they're not my mom and dad. They're not. Billy, where are your mom and dad? I don't know. They're at home, I guess. I don't really know where I am. You don't know how you got here? I know how I got here. It was a long time ago. I was at the shopping mall with Mom. She got busy talking to someone. And there was somebody behind me and they said something I can't remember. And I woke up and I was in the wrong car. And Mr. and Mrs. Kellerman were there, and they said that Mom wanted me to come with them. They said they were going to be my new family. I tried to get out of the car, but they were going so fast, and I didn't know what to do. I yelled for Mom, but I couldn't see anything with that blanket on my face. That was a really long time ago. They kidnapped you. It was a long time ago. Did they say why they brought you here? Mrs. Kellerman said that she wanted a baby. Another baby. The first baby didn't live. They had a baby that didn't survive. She said it cried all the time. It cried all the time, and so she did something, and she made the crying stop. Jesus. I guess she wanted a baby that was older, a baby that wouldn't cry all the time. And then they saw you. I don't know. This isn't even your family. I don't know. And they make you rock the baby. I think they made God angry, When they made the baby go quiet the first time, they made God angry. So God sent Mr. Janti. And now they make you rock the baby. That's my job, they always say. They say, you rock the baby. Sometimes it's for all day. I don't get to go outside. And if you don't rock the baby, God will send Mr. Janti. If the baby cries, Mr. Janti doesn't like it when the baby cries. Billy, has Mr. Janti ever hurt you? I hid under the bed, but I saw what he did. You saw what? Oh, he broke Mr. Kellerman's leg real bad. And he threw Mrs. Kellerman up against the wall real bad. She was fast, though. She got in here and she rocked the baby. But if she hadn't, I don't know. Mr. Janti, he was awful mad. I don't know what he would have done. I just closed my eyes and I heard him go away. Christie sat there quietly processing everything she just heard. She was confused, she was shocked, afraid, enraged. This boy sitting right in front of her just stared ahead matter-of-factly, like all hope had long ago been bled out of him. He was a prisoner in someone else's story, a shadow of the boy he used to be. Who knows how long he had been in this place? And the minutes ticked by as they sat there, until Christie finally said, Billy, would you like to get out of here with me? That's not gonna happen. Christie spun to see Mr. and Mrs. Kellerman standing in the bedroom doorway. For the first time, Mr. Kellerman spoke. Don't fight us, Christie. You have a very special purpose for being here. His wife jumped in. She has such beautiful eyes, lovely hair, beautiful skin. I always wanted a girl. She even looks a little bit like you. Mr. Kellerman's face was eerily serene. Everything is coming together. Welcome home, honey. You can take care of Billy, and we will take care of you. Christie's eyes were wild with desperation. This had all been a ruse to get her inside. Mr. Kellerman lunged at her and put a cloth over her mouth. The cloth was wet and smelled of chemicals. Christie's heavy gasps drew the chemicals into her lungs, and she felt herself beginning to lose consciousness. She struggled and clawed, her shoes kicking off the soles of her feet with the effort, but she was no match for the man who held her against the wall. Her vision blurred, her limbs got weak, her screams became pitiful moans. Through her semi-conscious haze, she scanned the room, and her eyes locked on Billy. And on his face, she no longer saw the passive gaze, the resigned eyes, the muted expression of a little lost boy. On Billy's face, she saw rage. Billy screamed at a volume that rattled the glass of the windows. He grabbed one of Christie's shoes and he slammed it repeatedly against the wall, over and over with all of his might, pounding at the house like a drum, shouting 2 words at the top of his voice: "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" Mr. Kellerman released his hold on Christie. He and his wife lunged for the boy in a panic, but he was small and he was fast, and he slipped out of their grasps as he flailed about the room, still pounding on the walls and yelling, "Wake up! Wake up!" Christie suddenly realized what Billy was trying to do, and she joined in, on tempo, banging her fists against the shadow of the rocker on the wall. "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" And following that terrible cry came another. And in a flash, Mr. Janti was there. His hands were open, as was his mouth with the jagged teeth, the awful breath reeking of a week-old corpse. The eyes locked first on Mrs. Kellerman, and he was upon her. His gigantic right hand covered the whole of her face, muffling her screams. His mouth opened even wider, another roar tearing through the room. And Mr. Janti closed his hand into a fist to the sound of Mrs. Kellerman's breaking skull. Her arms and legs went limp, and then Mr. Janti dropped her now almost headless body down onto the floor like a bloody rag. He slowly turned his gaze to the left. Mr. Kellerman, who could not escape through the blocked bedroom door, was cowering in the corner. He cried out in desperation, "I'll let her go! I'll let them both go! They're free! There's no reason to hurt me! They're free! They're both free to go away and never come back here ever! They're free!" Mr. Janti's head cocked a little bit to one side. He didn't seem to really be considering the words, except with a kind of amusement at this man's desperate ploy. His expression was clear. No, you will not survive this day. You will not survive." Mr. Janti stepped toward Mr. Kellerman and grabbed him by the calf of the leg with a grip like that of a shark. And as the desperate man clawed at the walls and carpet, Mr. Janti began to drag him out of the room. The pounding of the man's limbs dented the door and tore at the sheetrock as he bargained again and again for his life. "Don't do this. What can I do? Tell me what to do. I'll make it right. I'll do what's right." The words might as well have been in another language. To Mr. Janti, they meant nothing. All of a sudden, Mr. Janti's beastly frame stopped in the hallway. He looked back into the room, then down at Mr. Kellerman, then back into the room. And suddenly Mr. Janti reached down with his massive hands, grabbed Mr. Kellerman's left leg just above the kneecap, and he snapped it to the bone. The sound of the scream was deafening. Mr. Kellerman writhed on the floor of the hallway as Mr. Janti then released him and stepped back into the bedroom. He stared at Christie and Billy, his eyes still brimming with murderous rage, his heavy breath like a kick in the chest every time he exhaled. He scanned them both, left and right, his enormous hands balled up into fists, the sound of the baby's cry piercing the room. An eternal minute passed. Then Mr. Janti moved his giant frame toward the back of the room, toward the picket shadows on the bedroom wall. And with his left hand, He touched the shape of the baby's crib, not clumsily, not angrily, but with a gentleness that you wouldn't think possible for a creature like this. And he rocked it back and forth and back and forth until the baby's cries went silent. And he held his hand there upon the picket frame, upon the shadow, as the room grew deathly silent, and the shadow upon the wall slowly disappeared, and only Mr. Janti, Christie, and Billy remained. The giant drifted its eyes once again toward the terrified teenager and her young charge. And then it turned even further to gaze at the agony taking place in the hallway, Mr. Kellerman trying so hard to drag himself away on a shattered leg. In a blink, Mr. Janti was upon him, and they listened to the man's screams as Mr. Janti's giant footsteps moved down the hall, down the stairs, beyond this world, into the everlasting storm. Not all avenging angels are covered in white light. Sometimes they're dark and violent, terrible to the eyes and ears and senses. But the nightmare was over. There was no baby cry. There were no cries of any kind. Only the sound of the rain upon the windows and the assurances from the older to the younger that the danger had passed, that the door was open, that there was a family out there waiting for him to come home, and that everything was going to be all right.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming Free Thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.